Doesn't want to blame it on supply chain issues, the war in Russia, and the high cost of cotton. No, she's decided to blame it on tampons being available in men's bathrooms because she's alleging that transgender people are looking to use tampons. None of it makes sense, but who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Okay, maybe I'm the crazy one. So let's watch her argument and then you decide.
Men have taken over everything. They're women of the year in every category, in women's categories. And the latest news is, Brian, that now there's a shortage of tampons, and that's probably because men are buying tampons. And
is this breaking news right now? Is this a joke?
No, it's not a joke.
Am I being punked right now? Are you telling me that this is legit?
I'm telling you the truth.
They're putting the tampons in the men's bathrooms. Not a joke, not a lie.
Okay, yeah.
What?
Not at all.
Where exactly are they putting the tampons? Why?
Okay.
Why? Like where do the tampons go?
Look.
Where do you put your tampons, lady? Like what are you talking about?
Look, she's so dumb that if she wasn't a politician attacking other people and causing damage in the world, I wouldn't allow anybody to attack her.
Right, because you feel like you're attacking someone who might have a serious, No,
I'm being totally serious.
Yeah, I am too.
Yeah, like I'd almost want to protect her, like poor girl, right? Like so. Look, none of what she's saying is true, of course. I mean, everybody knows that.
Genital mutilation has been nearly universally condemned. Genital mutilation has been condemned by the WHO, the United Nations Children's Fund, the United Nations Population Fund. According to the WHO, genital mutilation is recognized internationally as a violation of human rights. American culture is now normalizing the idea that minors can be given hormones to prevent their biological development of their secondary sexual characteristics. Dr. Levine, do you believe that minors are capable of making such a life-changing decision as changing one's sex?
So, by the way, in what he was saying, obviously he's talking to Dr. Levine because she's the first transgender nominee that could potentially get confirmed for such a position like this, and so she must be the one that's in charge of doing of everything that's about this. That's his first thought, and also demonizing her as just for who she is.
Let me just go head on to what Rand Paul is saying. So it's deeply offensive to compare it to genital mutilation, which is not in reality of their own volition. Okay, they do it to very young children. It has no relationship to trans folks at all, who are choosing to be who they actually are. So what Rand Paul is saying is, I don't really believe in freedom. And I don't want you to follow your beliefs. I want you to follow my beliefs. Yep. My interpretation of my religion says you shouldn't do this. So now I'm gonna impose that on you because I never believed in America.
And what we have done is become comfortable with what is okay in our society. I am not comfortable with the transgenders, the kids that they brought in my classroom, when they said that this kid is transgendering into a different sex, that I couldn't have kids laugh at them, like I couldn't have, like other kids got in trouble for having transgender kids in my class. That's why I vote for school choice.
That was hilarious.
That was amazing.
Yeah. So now I couldn't even have the other kids laugh at them and bully them. And the guy's like, hey, that got his attention. And when I watched that clip the first time, I was like, did the volume go off? Because I think she realized that she'd clowned herself.
She stepped in it.
Yeah,
100%.
and then she paused for like 4 brutal seconds. Right? And then she's like, no, I'm sticking with it. The real problem is the transgenders and how we can't mock them, okay? I mean, all the other kids were having fun mocking them and then they get in trouble for it. What the hell kind of country do we live in anymore, huh?
But if you really want that ignorant, the ignorance is crystallized in my mind when she says the phrase, kids are transgendering.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a terrible story, but it was hard, not to be amused by the depth of her ignorance, right?
Insanely ignorant.
Yeah, and then they bring the transgenders in here, and there's transgendering all over the place, and now we can't even bully them. I remember the good old days. I mean, we'd do much worse. Yeah, it's the most evangelical, district.
I'm an Hispanic man. Could I decide I was an Asian man? Would I have the ability to be an Asian man and challenge Harvard's discrimination because I made that decision?
Senator, I'm not able to answer your question. You're asking me about hypotheticals and
I'm asking you how you would assess standing if I came in and said I have decided I identify as an Asian man.
I would assess standing the way I assess other legal issues, which is to listen to the arguments made by the parties, consider the relevant precedents and the constitutional principles involved, and make a determination.
Yeah,
they make a mockery out of government. They make a mockery out of the Supreme Court. What is the point of having these hearings if you're going to be asking her questions that are super irrelevant to what she would be doing as a Supreme Court justice?
Look, I get that there are people who don't understand what the experience of a trans person is like. Partially because our society has pretended that it doesn't exist for so long, partially because there's been so little representation in media. It is difficult for people who haven't had that experience to understand it. But it takes extra work to try to draw an equivalence with what if I thought that I was Asian? What if I thought that I was rich? Do you have to give me no? That's not actually how gender works. Gender is a self-expression. Some of the other things that you jokingly use to attack and alienate trans people are based on something else.
I'll never stop searching for good ideas from both parties to improve Wisconsin.
Here in Iowa, we may get up early, but we're not woke.
Ohio needs an ass kicker, not an ass kisser.
I promise I'll do everything I can to help make things better, and I'll always tell you the truth.
If you believe the 2020 election was stolen, definitely not your candidate.
Welcome back to State of the Union, the final push until Election Day, just a couple of days away. Thank you so much. Our panel is here. Michael Smerconish, you just came down from the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. What are your thoughts on what you're seeing there, and then just more broadly?
Broadly, there's a consensus that's formed. It's based on the polling data, the betting markets, which I pay attention to. Maybe most importantly, the travel schedules of the principals, like where are people being deployed and where's the money being spent? It would all have to be wrong for there to be something other than a huge victory for Republicans on Tuesday night, which I anticipate. The only saving grace, I think, for Democrats could be that the Republican vote has been undervalued in the last few cycles, and maybe pollsters have this time overcompensated for that, but I think that's a stretch.
You came from the real world also, South
Yes,
Carolina.
no, I actually think that you're seeing Republican pollsters kind of flood the market with some polling that may not be the best in the world. But I do think Democrats are going to have a better night than people expect. And the reason being is I think Democrats will probably won't know who wins the Senate until after Georgia, which will probably be December. But on Tuesday night, you're going to see Democrats maintain or win governor's mansions in states that really matter. You're going to have Wisconsin. You're going to have Michigan. You're going to have Pennsylvania. Those states matter. And why do those states matter? Because of 2024. And you're also going to have Wes Moore, who's going to flip Maryland. And so you're going to have some victories, although we probably won't take back the House or keep the House. We're going to maintain the Senate. And those governor's mansions really matter.
Well, I'm looking forward to getting Michael's advice on the betting markets because I need help there. But I think that, look, I think it's going to be a great night for Republicans. I think that Kevin McCarthy's been underappreciated. The fact that in 2020 he didn't give up an incumbent, and now he's on the cusp of winning 20 to 25 additional seats. I think we pick up the Senate, and I actually think we're going to win a couple of governor's mansions. And so I think it's going to be a very big night for Republicans.
Hillary, you have a different take maybe than Bakari on Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mark
speaking
is right.
as a Democrat.
I'm a loyal Democrat, but I am not happy. I just think that we are, we did not listen to voters in this election, and I think we're going to have a bad night. And, this conversation is not going to have much impact on Tuesday, but I hope it has an impact going forward. Because when voters tell you over and over and over again that they care mostly about the economy, listen to them. Stop talking about democracy being at stake. Democracy is at stake because people are fighting so much about what elections mean. I mean, voters have told us what they wanted to hear, and I don't think Democrats have really delivered this cycle.
I think that's actually very true about the national messaging that's going on. But you actually have some good candidates who are following your advice. You have people like Mark Kelly, who is running a great race. You have people like Raphael Warnock, who's running a great race, and Josh Shapiro,
I would say in those places,
Fetterman, and Tim Ryan.
We have our, the unfortunate combination of strong gubernatorial candidates, like Mark Kelly is I was just in Arizona and spent some time there, talked to a bunch of voters. Mark Kelly's popular, but Kari Lake is more popular. And the combination of Kari Lake's popularity and Joe Biden's unpopularity is going to hurt Mark Kelly. And so I think we're in trouble because of the top of the ticket.
Are you going to interrupt her and disagree with her?
I don't want to break up dem on dem violence. Exactly. But I feel like Blake Masters is going to win Arizona because the reality is that the border is a serious issue down there. And to Hillary's point, the Democrats have not talked about how what we're going to do to fix inflation at a 40-year high. What are we going to do to control the border? What are we going to do to handle crime?
It's not because of facts, Mark. I don't think we're in trouble because of facts. I think we're in trouble because of messaging.
I think you're in huge trouble because of facts.
You guys were in office for a long time.
The reality is inflation's at a 40-year high because of specifically the spending policy.
You were in office for a long time and did nothing to fix immigration. You never passed a bill. You never got anything
because of what you guys have done.
We have an economic story to tell. People actually like our policies better on the economy.
You're kidding yourself.
And we have not been doing.
Michael.
One footnote to file away for Tuesday night as those Pennsylvania returns come in. Josh Shapiro, I think, is going to win handily against Doug Mastriano. But it'll be capped in terms of the impact on the rest of the ticket because no longer can Pennsylvanians, as we say, pull the big ticket. You've got to vote each race individually. We have a history of ticket splitting. It might be to the benefit of Dr. Oz.
Oh, that's fascinating. Okay, I know, obviously, we are 2 days away from 2022 in the midterms, but 2024, the whole question of will Donald Trump run seems to be answered. He hasn't, of course, announced, but he's made pretty clear that he's close. And one of the big tells is he's already going after potential GOP rivals. Listen to what he said about Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, last night.
We're winning big, big, big in the Republican Party for the nomination like nobody's ever seen before. Let's see, there it is, Trump at 71, Ron DeSanctimonious at 10%, Mike Pence at 7. Oh, Mike's doing better than I thought.
Mark?
Well, I think that's a pretty...
We're not laughing at you, Mark. I'm just saying.
I know that, Bakari. I think that was a pretty lame attack on DeSantis. But I think the more telling
Mike
sign...
Pence was in there, too.
I think the more telling sign, frankly, was the notion last week. You saw news that the DOJ was to give independent counsel for indictments coming against President Trump. And I think he feels like he wanted to actually be announced sooner because he wanted credit for the midterm success. And he wants to get ahead of those impending indictments because then he can say, see, look, Biden's DOJ is only going after me because I'm an announced candidate. So I think that was really the more telling sign about a week ago.
I want to put up something that another person who's thinking about running for the Republican nomination, Mike Pompeo, who was in the Trump cabinet, said. He tweeted, not tired of winning, at Governor Ron DeSantis. You've proven conservative policies work. Florida is better for it. Vote for Ron DeSantis.
Trump is better than any kid I ever met at the playground at ranking. I think that's what this is called in terms of assigning nicknames that stick. And I think, frankly, he may have a winner with regard to DeSantis. Time will tell. For me, the big takeaway is it's the clearest sign he really is getting in. And is about to announce.
That's the best news Democrats are going to have. I mean, listen, there's no better foil for Democrats than Donald Trump, somebody who is facing indictments.
Be careful what you wish for.
Well, I mean, we wished for it. We wished for it in 2016, and we failed, and that's for a number of reasons. And then we actually were able to beat him soundly in 2020. And so, what I do believe, though, is Democrats actually rally around messaging that is opposed to everything Donald Trump stands for. It's extremely clear. And the closing message we have now, although it's not listening to voters, may actually work against somebody like Donald Trump.
Well, and you have this situation where a nasty Republican primary is probably good for Democrats, but because the nastier Donald Trump is, and by the way, Ron DeSantis is sanctimonious. He just
I was about to say it perfectly
He just
fits.
released an ad this week comparing himself to God, so as a creation. So the fact that you will be reminding voters of what they actually rejected about Donald Trump will actually be helpful.
Mark, I wanted to ask you if you think that Donald Trump's timing here has anything to do also, not just with the midterms, but with trying to get ahead of your former boss and close confidant, Mike Pence. He's going on a book tour. And Donald Trump is going to maybe try to step on that as well. Is that a factor?
That wouldn't be out of character for the former president. But I also think that in some ways to help elevate the book tour and draw more attention. I think as The former vice president travels the country. He's more and more encouraged by what people tell him about wanting a different style of leadership and a level of competent leadership in this country that we've been missing. So I think it could actually just elevate it.
I think we just saw the beginning of the Mike Pence. The Mike Pence
Not
pitch.
real until
All
he
right.
gets a nickname.
Maybe
All right,
it'll
guys.
draw Pence out to say things about January 6th that he really hasn't said publicly.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Tonight, the final countdown to election night is on.
The choice couldn't be clearer. The stakes couldn't be higher. I know we can meet the moment.
We're going to take back the House, take back the Senate. We're going to take back America.
At stake, control of Congress, dozens of governorships and state legislatures.
Are you ready to win this election? People are ready to save our state. Can I count on you for that?
Both parties looking to capitalize on key issues.
It's the economy. People can't afford food.
What we need to talk about is the crime in the streets.
And motivate their voters.
Stand up and fight for democracy.
And if you don't think the right to choose is an economic issue, you don't have a uterus.
With a result that could echo through 2024.
Across the country, some of the folks who tried to undermine our democracy are running for offices that will oversee the next election.
This is a Meet the Press election special, live from Washington with Chuck Todd and Kristen Welker.
Good evening, just a week away. Welcome to this Meet the Press election special. At this hour, 1 week from tonight, the first polls will have already closed, the first votes will have already been counted, and we will have our first results coming in for an election that will determine the direction of this country for the next 2 years and set the table for the big fight in 2024.
That's right. And tonight we are going to break down all the key races, what to watch, who to watch, and how to watch as those results come in, plus why it all matters and why we may not know who controls Congress by the time you go to sleep next Tuesday, even if you live on the West Coast, Chuck.
Shoot, we may not know for a week under certain scenarios. We'll see. These midterms are taking place in a time of extraordinary unrest and volatility. This is, in fact, the first national election this country is holding since the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. And the threat of political violence is obviously still looming large. We're just days removed from an attacker who was targeting the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, who broke into her home in San Francisco and brutally assaulted her husband.
And that attack, of course, did not happen in a vacuum. As you know, disinformation and lies about election fraud have become an increasingly troubling part of the political discourse in this country.
In fact, by NBC's count, believe it or not, essentially half of all the gubernatorial nominees on the ballot, 18, half of the Senate nominees on the ballot, 17, 10 Secretary of State nominees on the ballot right now, all on this ballot have cast some form of doubt on the 2020 election results, all of them running as Republicans. We'll dive into that issue throughout the night as well. But the democracy may be motivating some voters, and as serious as those threats are, the economy and crime are also driving forces with many voters. And it is those two issues that have Republicans feeling extraordinarily confident about their prospects of a clean sweep 1 week from tonight.
That's right. Republicans seem to have momentum right now, Chuck, and they are feeling particularly confident about the prospect of regaining control of the House of Representatives. All 435 House seats are up for grabs, and in the Senate, 35 seats are on the ballot with 1 week to go. Many of those races are in pure coin flip territory. The Senate right now is evenly split, 50-50, with the vice president as the tie-breaking vote that gives Democrats control.
So Republicans need just one Senate seat to flip. And in the House, they need to just gain 5 seats. That is actually the smallest number of seats an out-of-power party has needed to flip the House since 1932, the old FDR years. And as we know, traditionally, midterms not very kind to the president's party.
Yeah, and the polls are tight, that's for sure. And of course, it's not just control of Congress at stake. There are gubernatorial races, Secretary of State races, ballot propositions covering everything from abortion to sports betting and much, much more.
And we're looking at what could be the highest turnout for a midterm election ever. Our last NBC News poll showed interest in this election was sky high. As of late today, there were nearly 25 million votes already have been cast nationwide. We expect probably another 100 million more. So we got a lot to go over for the next 2 hours. This is going to prepare you for everything you need to know on election night and beyond. We have reporters all across the country in every one of the major races in states that you care about.
That's right, and we are going to get out to some of our correspondents in those top races. NBC's Dasha Burns is on the ground in Luzerne, Pennsylvania. NBC's Ellison Barber is in Somerville, Georgia. That's in the northern part of the state. NBC's Shaq Brewster is in Madison, Wisconsin. But first, we do want to get to NBC's Steve Kornacki, who's at the big board to give us the lay of the land 1 week out. Steve, set the scene for us. What are you watching?
Well, what you mentioned, one of the reasons for that Republican confidence, you're talking about historically how the president's party does in a midterm election. This is what that history looks like. It is pretty grisly for the White House party. Going back here to 1942, what you're seeing are the House seats, the red ink. Those are lost House seats in midterm elections for the White House party. Just 2 exceptions where the White House party actually gained seats. It was 1998, Bill Clinton. This is as Republicans were gearing up to impeach him. Bill Clinton's approval rating on Election Day 1998. Remember, impeachment backfired politically. His approval rating was 68% on Election Day 1998, and that allowed his party to buck history and gain 5 seats. And in 2002, George W. Bush and the Republicans did it as well. This was just over a year after 9/11. Bush's approval rating was in the mid-60s on Election Day 2002, and again, his party gained seats. So Democrats hoping to defy history this year. You're up against all of this red ink here. You're also up against 2 exceptions where, hey, Joe Biden's in the low mid-40s right now. He's not in Bush 02, Clinton 98 territory. So the history is certainly intimidating. It's imposing for the Democrats right now. Something else this is a Gallup poll this week that looked at the top issues to voters, asking voters, what do you rank as extremely important as you make up your mind? And again, no surprise, we see this in every poll. It's the economy. It's inflation that's at the top of this. Abortion, number 2, an issue obviously that emerged mid-year with that Supreme Court ruling as a big part of this election. Then crime, gun policy, immigration. What's striking is when they asked folks, okay, if you consider the issue extremely important, how are you going to vote? Look at how it breaks here. On 4 of the 5 issues, you have Republican advantages, and on 3 of them, you have pretty massive. The economy, crime, and immigration, pretty sizable Republican advantages there. The one exception, obviously, is the issue Democrats have probably been running the hardest on. That's abortion. They do find a double-digit Democratic advantage on abortion. So overall, that climate, that issues climate, seems to favor Republicans as well. Where they could get tripped up, though, one place Republicans could get tripped up, as we look at the Senate map here, is the recruitment of candidates, the candidates they ended up with through primaries. You know, Donald Trump took a very active role and got through a lot of candidates in key Republican Senate primaries. Could it cost Republicans key seats they might otherwise win and that chance to get the net gain in the Senate? Could they lose it? So what you see here in blue, those are the most vulnerable Democratic seats where Republicans are trying to play offense. In red, the most vulnerable Republican-held seats where Democrats are trying to get flips. And just take a look, a couple of these here. In Georgia, if you're following politics this year, you are familiar with the struggles Herschel Walker has had, the revelations, the accusations, the campaign trail stumbles. Is Herschel Walker going to fall short against Warnock in a year that might otherwise be favorable there for a Republican in Georgia? Blake Masters has been underperforming. Kerry Lake, the gubernatorial candidate, as he runs for Senate in Arizona, was Masters a weak nominee there? J.D. Vance got that nomination in Ohio. Trump state twice, but Vance has been in a fight with Ryan in the polls. We'll see about that one. And then Pennsylvania won Democrats. This is a flip. If Democrats can get it, they badly need it. Mehmet Oz, the Republican nominee, again, Trump-backed. There was another candidate in the primary, McCormick there, who a lot of Republicans think might have been stronger in a general election against Fetterman. But Oz is who Republicans will go with. Oz is who Trump backed in the primary.
You know, Steve, there's going to be a lot of backseat driving on Senate strategy depending on what happens on election night, right? Republicans will have a Trump conversation if they come up short. I assume Democrats will have the conversation about whether they actually put enough effort into the Floridas and Ohio's of the world, or even throw in an Iowa and a Utah. I look at that 2024 map, and you tell me. But if Democrats don't hold the Senate in 22, I don't know how they hold in 24, how they get it back in 24.
Yeah, the collection of seats up in 24. You're looking at Joe Manchin. Could he get reelected again? Would he even try? Could any other Democrat win in a state like West Virginia? Throw Montana in there, a bunch of others. Yeah, and I think, look, it depends. If Ohio ends up there's two ways Ohio can go to me here if the Democrats don't win it. If it's a nail biter, the question you're asking is one they'll be asking. But the other thing we've seen in Ohio in 16, 18, and 20 is the final polling had it real close, and the election results had it pretty sizable for the Republicans.
Well, Steve, there seems to be this, Republicans keep saying this to us in briefings. In polling, the Democratic number is accurate. It's the Republican number that seems to fluctuate more, whether that's MAGA voters that don't want to talk to pollsters or whatever the reason. There does seem to be some volatility there.
And I think that could be one of the other questions we're potentially asking after this election. And that, I mean, 16, 18 to some degree, and 20 definitely pose some big picture questions about polling. Are they amplified by 22?
Right. Yeah. That's for sure.
All right,
brother.
Steve Kornacki breaking it all down for us. Steve, thank you so much.
You got it.
Let's head out to Dasha Burns now in Pennsylvania. Dasha, you have, of course, been covering the razor-tight Senate race out there, which has so many twists and turns. Obviously, the gubernatorial race in the spotlight as well. In this final sprint, what are you watching? And the significance that you're going to have all the heavy hitters there over the weekend, President Biden, former Presidents Obama and Trump.
Well, Kristen, Chuck, you know why I am here in Luzerne County, of all places, tonight, and it's because it's one of the places that we've been watching for our County to County series. Let me set the scene here. This is a county that was once a Democratic stronghold, full of union towns, blue dog Democrat towns. But in 2016, Trump won this county by double digits. He did it again in 2020. And because Democrats have lost in areas like this, they really need to run up the numbers and win big in Philadelphia and in the suburbs around Philadelphia, which have been a major battleground here, especially in the Senate race. Oz has been trying to chip away at Fetterman's lead in the suburbs. He's been focusing on the economy. He's been focusing on issues of crime, which are the issues we consistently hear, especially out of suburban women, as top concerns. But you know who actually was Blue Island in Luzerne County in 2020 is Josh Shapiro. He did win here. He had success. And when you look at the polling, when you look at the numbers, you see a consistent difference in the lead that Shapiro has against his Republican opponent, Doug Mastriano, in the gubernatorial race. Whereas in the Senate race, you've seen these two candidates, Fetterman and Oz, neck and neck in the polls. And why do you think that is? Well, we've been talking to experts. There are folks who are going to be splitting their ticket this time around, voting for Shapiro and Oz, especially Republican voters who are more moderate, who simply can't vote for Mastriano, are willing to stomach Shapiro and think Oz can potentially be a more moderate voice. This is something that kind of goes against the narrative, guys, of the political polarization we've seen. But turns out the voters we've been talking to, candidate quality does matter. And these are the voters that could potentially make a difference on Election Day, guys.
That's for sure. Dasha Burns in Pennsylvania. Dasha, thank you. We're going to move to Ellison, Barbara, in Georgia. And you know what's interesting to me about both the Pennsylvania race and the Georgia race, Ellison, is neither the candidates are not having a debate about issues. In many ways, they're both character tests of different reasons. And in Georgia, my goodness, you can't look at your television without seeing either something about allegations against Herschel Walker or something about domestic allegations against Raphael Warnock. How nasty has this gotten in the last 10 days?
It has dramatically increased in terms of messiness, the back and forth. You know, earlier in the campaign, when there were all these questions coming out about Walker's past, particularly as it relates to allegations of violence, things that he had openly talked about in the past, saying that it was something that occurred because he was struggling with mental health issues. Warnock stayed away from a lot of that stuff. When the first abortion allegation came out, a claim Herschel Walker very quickly denied, Warnock didn't really go there. But now, in the last 10, 14 days, things have really dramatically changed. We hear Democrat Senator Warnock more aggressively going after some of those personal issues with Herschel Walker, and really Herschel Walker kind of being in a position where he has to answer for them, I think, a little more frequently than maybe we saw at the beginning of this race, particularly in the primaries. I remember the Republican who was trying to challenge him in the primaries here, Gary Black, he tried to make a very big point as it related to some of the past allegations with violence in Walker's history in his life, and it did not stick at all in the primaries, and it really didn't seem to be something that was going to be a huge issue in the campaign early on, in part because Warnock really didn't go there, right? He let outside groups do a lot of that, but we have seen that dramatically change of late. There is a second abortion allegation that has come out in recent days. Herschel Walker says that is a lie, but one thing that has been interesting is just talking with Walker's supporters about some of those allegations. I think back to the interview that Kristen Welker did with Herschel Walker, where she was asking him about some of his struggles with mental health issues, that part of his past. And the answer he gave to that was, he said, I have been redeemed. I do not live in that house anymore. And what we're seeing with a lot of the Republicans in this state, the base, white evangelical voters who are very important for Republicans, is that they feel like that answer. Is sufficient. They don't believe the abortion allegations, but on the other controversies, the fact that he talks about his faith, that he says, I don't live in that house anymore, that resonates for them. I will say quickly, we're looking at a new AJC poll, and in this poll, Warnock and Walker are essentially in a statistical tie. But what is most interesting to me is that within that poll, there is a small but significant percentage of Republican-leaning voters saying that they're not going to vote for Herschel Walker. According to this poll, 6% of Republican-leaning voters who said they are going to vote for incumbent Republican Governor Brian Kemp say they will not vote for Herschel Walker, and an additional 5% said they're going to vote for the Libertarian candidate instead. And in a tight race, guys, that's a very big deal.
Yeah, those crossover votes are going to be so critical. We'll be watching those very closely. Great reporting there. Thank you so much, Ellison Barber, for us in Georgia. I want to head out to Wisconsin now, where Shaq Brewster is. And Shaq, you've been doing so much reporting on the Senate race there. We're talking about how intense the verbal attacks have gotten on both sides in Georgia and in Pennsylvania. And we're seeing that play out in the Senate race in Wisconsin as well.
Yeah, you're hearing a lot more attacks on the campaign trail. Ron Johnson yesterday saying essentially his opponent, Mandela Barnes, the lieutenant governor of this state, does not like Americans, does not like Wisconsinites. And Mandela Barnes firing back and saying you can't listen to anything he says because he's desperate. You know, one thing that you're hearing from both campaigns when you talk to aides and advisors, I spoke to the Mandela Barnes campaign manager earlier today, and they're both saying that they're optimistic. They're both saying that their internal numbers, the Mandela Barnes campaign released an internal poll today showing him up a few points. They're both saying their internal numbers show a margin of error race. And you hear both of the campaigns saying that they like what they're seeing from the early voting numbers. But what that essentially means is that this is a jump ball. And that's why you're hearing this focus on turnout right now. Across the state of Wisconsin, more than about 450,000 people have already cast the ballot. Here in Dane County, this is the county, the capital of Wisconsin, the county where Democrats get the largest share of their votes. Voter turnout is already at about 27%, and that's still with several more days of early voting to go, and then election day. So there's a lot of focus, a lot of attention on turnout, getting people out, and that's why you're seeing those incumbents and surrogates come to the state of Wisconsin. Last weekend, it was former President Barack Obama. Later, we're going to see Bernie Sanders, Ted Cruz. Last week, we also saw Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin. So there's a big focus on turnout because everyone understands this is going to be a jump ball. It's going to come out to who shows up to the polls on Election Day. And one other note about what we're going to see out of Wisconsin, I just got off the phone with the chair of the Milwaukee Elections Commission. And, you know, one of the sources of many of those, of much of the misinformation that we've heard out of 2018 or in 2020, the so-called ballot dumps came from because of the fact that you had Milwaukee not submitting their votes, their absentee ballots, until late in the night. They collect all the absentee ballots, they count them all at once, and then they submit them to the county. Well, the chair of the election commission there in Milwaukee told me that this year they are expecting to count those absentee ballots by midnight Eastern time. Last year it was or in 2020, it was 3 a.m. when we got that total. That can go a long way to building trust in this election as we continue to see more people vote absentee.
Shaq, you did a good job of previewing something we're going to have at the end of the show, which is we're going to let people know what races, what states we do expect to be able to call before the Today Show begins on Wednesday morning. Anyway.
They're just a handful, by the way.
Shaquille Brewster on the ground for us in Wisconsin. Shaq, thank you. We got a lot more ahead. We got battle for the Senate. We got to talk gubernatorial races. We got House races, you name it. In fact, next, I'm going to show you some of the races we are following very closely in that fight for the control of the House and what Republicans say they plan to do with control of Congress.
But first, take a look at what else is on the ballot in some states. 5 states are voting on recreational marijuana use. 4 states, California, Kentucky, Michigan, and Vermont, all have some form of abortion rights legislation on the ballot. We'll be watching whether those ballot measures affect turnout in those places. We'll be right back. You're watching Meet the Press Election Special. Welcome back to our Meet the Press election special. As we said at the start of the show, Democrats hold a very slim majority in the House right now, so Republicans only need to gain 5 House seats to take control of the chamber. There are 435 House seats, all of them up for grabs. But we've narrowed it down to just a handful to watch on election night to know which party will hold on to the Speaker's gavel. Chuck is at the big board here to walk us through some of those key races.
I'm waiting for a bit of a reboot here on the board. Welcome to live television.
While we do
here
that,
we go.
yes,
All right.
go for
now
it,
we've got the big board up and running here. Let me get people to our interesting way to watch election night tonight here on this front. We got 8 races that we identified in the political unit. And to give you an idea, right now, most of these are held by Democrats. A couple of them are brand new seats. Colorado 8 and essentially North Carolina 13 are sort of created seats after reapportionment. But when you look at all of these 8 seats, these will tell you if Republicans are winning control of the House, they're going to run a majority of these 8. But let's take you a quick little trip through them here so you can get an idea of where they are. And hopefully our map will take you there. There we go. Here's the 8th district in Colorado. This is essentially one of these, and all of these districts have almost the same thing in common. They're a little suburban, they're a little exurban, and they're a little rural. That's what makes them interesting battleground districts. So here you've got the Denver suburbs all the way up there to the Fort Collins suburbs. A little bit in between, similar district there in Colorado. Let's go over to Minnesota too, the suburbs of St. Paul. Let's travel there. Angie Craig, she was in a tough race last time. She's in a tough one this time. Same thing. This is a suburban district that starts creeping out into the exurbs and into some rural territory. It's what makes this such a 50-50 race. I'll take you over to Nevada 3. This is in the Las Vegas suburbs down here. This is a bit different. It's Vegas. Plus, there's a lot of new population here. In many ways, the Las Vegas congressional districts remind me a lot of the fast-growing Central Florida congressional districts. A lot of people who didn't live in Nevada 2 years ago and 4 years ago are suddenly residents down here. Let me take you out east here to Pennsylvania's 8th district. This is get you in here so you can see the district a little bit better here. This is north of Allentown here. This is in this area where it's supposed to be Scranton Joe country, if you will. Obviously, this is a district that Matt Cartwright has essentially overperformed in. Democrats are fairly confident, but if this night is starting to turn as Republicans think it will, this is a district that will sit here and be of interest to folks. Let me make my way down the coast here because Virginia 2 is going to be essentially the first district I talk about the most on TV. It's Virginia Beach. Virginia is an early counting state. This is a district that is 50-50. Elaine Luria on the January 6th committee. She's not been shy. She's sort of run into it. Jen Kiggins, also a military veteran, has been hitting on essentially the bread and butter issues on the economy. And has essentially said that she's been focused too much on January 6th, if you will. It's going to be an interesting test, both of the residents of the January 6th committee, but also this district is as swingy as they come, if you will. And this is one we should know early. If Democrats somehow hold this, election night is a far different night than a lot of people are planning right now. Let me go down to the coast here. You can already see it. This is North Carolina 13. This is that new district I was telling you about. North Carolina gained a seat. They created one here. So this is in the Raleigh area. But again, it's like those other districts I described. In the Raleigh area, it's pretty urban, but it's kind of sprawly. It's kind of ex-urban and rural, and it's got a little bit of everything that makes it such a pure battleground, if you will. This is brand new. Bo Hines is somebody that's been on the Trump side of the Republican ledger. It's something the Democrats believe gives them a chance to hold this seat, even if Republicans end up winning statewide. And then finally, two other races that we want to keep an eye out. If Democrats have any hope of having a better than expected night, they got to be able to defeat a Republican in California, David Valadao, the only one of the few Republicans who voted to impeach Trump who sought re-election. He's been hanging in there. He looks like he's going to survive. We shall see. And then there's one here. This is probably the best, the most vulnerable sitting Republican incumbent. Oh, whoops. I take you over here to Omaha. This is the single congressional district that Joe Biden won in 2020. Even though he won it, Don Bacon was able to win re-election. It's why he's considered a favorite, but I'll tell you, Democrats have poured a ton of money, and this time they have a nominee that is much closer to the center than to the progressive left, which is why they seem to be enthusiastic that they have a shot there. So that's just to give you a taste. Those 8 are as good of an 8 that you can pick that show you just directionally which way the House is going to vote there, Kristen.
Well, that's a good taste, and we're going to delve into it now, Chuck, with you and with our great panel, NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray, former Biden White House press secretary and an MSNBC host, Jen Psaki, and Republican strategist and a Meet the Press contributor, Sarah Fagan. Thanks so much to all of you for being here. You talked about some of the things that those districts had in common. You have to think about Trump when you talk about some of the people you just named, David Valadao. Don Bacon is someone, Sarah, let me start with you, who I think is just so interesting. He's walked this fine line when it comes to former President Trump. And, of course, Elaine Luria, who's on the January 6th committee. So all of these different kind of aspects that are being tested in these races.
Yes, and look, Donald Trump still looms very large over the Republican Party, and anybody on the ballot has to manage that. And in some cases, you really need to play to it, and in other cases, you need to walk a much finer line, of course, depending on the demographic makeup of the district. And you know, people look to Glenn Youngkin as really the model of how to do this, which is to praise Donald Trump on the things that you agree with him on, which for most Republicans is a lot of things. It's not difficult to find wins by the president, and to stay away from the name calling, the drama around personnel, and to try to not take the bait and, you know, get into the January 6th conspiracies and some of those types of things.
You know, this gets to what I think these midterms are really about, right? We're not changing anything, right? The same fights are going to be here, right? We're just sort of rearranging the deck chairs to decide what 2024 is going to look like. Right. But what these midterms are going to determine is which party has to deal with their internal problem first. And winning papers over problems, right? Democrats had these internal divisions, but they won in 2020. They papered them over. Republicans have a Trump problem, but if they win, they'll paper them over. So where does this head if the Democrats don't do well?
A kind of civil war, ideologically at least, Chuck. It is notable that you go back to 2016, and the two political parties have spent billions of dollars, and it seems like we've had this trench warfare. But we really kind of have moved the battle lines maybe like a few feet this election, and it goes back another this time around. And you're right that, you know, if Democrats are the ones kind of on the short end, and we're not really going to know that for probably months anyway, but if that is the case, yes, there's going to be a huge debate going forward on where should the party be. But also the thing, too, Chuck, is if Republicans do have a bad night, there are going to be recriminations on their side, too.
Jen, let's start with your side of the aisle. Defund the police, cashless bail. I watch a bunch of TV ads. It's the only thing you hear if you're in New York, if you're in Oregon, if you're in California. That idea didn't come from Joe Biden. That idea didn't come from Cory Booker. No. That idea didn't come from the mainstream wing of the party. It came from the progressive wing, far left wing of the party. I assume that's going to be a recrimination.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at New York alone, right? I mean, Kathy Hochul is in now a huge fight. Nobody predicted that to be the case. And that is a state where the House could be won or lost. And that could be an early evening no. I would also say,
Except, of course, New York has an arcane election system that polls don't close at 9 o'clock and we'll never get the count.
That's true, but I also think there are key races in there that the Republicans have heavily spent on. Sean Patrick Maloney, for example, where they've spent $5-6 million from outside groups on crime ads. And yes, that will be a big discussion. But to add to your point, though, I think it's been ideological a lot in the past. I actually think this time, if the Democrats lose the House, it's going to be a lot about generational change.
What about both the House and the Senate, though?
If they lose, well, it may be the same. It may also be generational change on every level.
And part of what we're talking about here and what we'll be watching for here is not just who wins, but by what margin, Sarah. If Republicans do win, the numbers matter. Winning 5-6 seats allows them to say we won, but they don't have a governing majority, right? And there's a lot of concern that if they win, immediately this will go to oversight. The White House is beefing up for that. They're hiring more lawyers. But what will you be watching for in terms of the numbers and in terms of the makeup, quite frankly?
Well, I mean, look, if you just look at redistricting alone, Republicans have largely won the House, is my assessment. Like, I don't think there's a big debate about that. We can look at polling.
Plus retirements.
Plus retirements.
Right. It's sort of, if Republicans can't win 5 seats, get out of the business.
So I think this is not really, in my view, this is not a debate. The question is, are you winning by 12 seats or are you winning by 20-plus seats? Right. And I think if you are winning by 20-plus seats, it is a real indictment on the president and the president heading into the prospect of re-election. I think that what's interesting about, Republicans are basically 5 years ahead of Democrats. Assuming Democrats do poorly on election night, which is my assumption, the lesson, I think, from progressives isn't going to be, well, we messed up in New York and Portland on crime. It's going to be, we gave you a chance. We put a moderate president in office, and look what it got us. And they're going to learn all the wrong lessons, and it is going to put so much pressure on their party in the presidential primary. And basically, that's where Republicans have been. But now you see a bit of a sea change.
All right, but what happens if you come up short? Does Trump become? I mean, if the flip happens, right?
Well, it's perfect for Republicans.
And then does it become a pointing the finger and it's all Donald Trump's fault if you don't win the Senate?
I think so.
Will the
and so, like, Republicans win either way, right?
Do they, though?
Yes.
Does the rank and file buy that?
Probably not. Like, in fairness, there's a lot of rank and file that are not going to ever blame Donald Trump for anything. But, look, politics is sort of a coalition game within the parties and certainly, within that independent streak. And so for Republicans, who want a non-Donald Trump candidate, every one of these issues accrues to Ron DeSantis. Georgia was the first straw. Donald Trump got into that primary in the last election, in that runoff, and cost us the Senate. Yeah. And you can't say it out loud, but they all think it.
Jen, oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I do think that a big factor here is what the Democrats do the next day and in the weeks after, because they can't do what Barack Obama did in 2010, which is to say, we're shellacked, we got shellacked, take a bite out of us, et cetera. The best thing for the Democrats is if they have a unifying fight against the Republicans and against Trump. So if that's Social Security, if it's judges, whatever it is, that's what they need to figure out. And I think they can prepare for that now, because to your point, if the Democrats hold the House on election night, that is a huge story. I mean, that would be an enormous story, but that's not where it looks to be headed with the polls.
All right, guys, stick around. Great start. We're not going anywhere yet. Mark, Jen, and Sarah. We will be coming back to you a lot more later. Coming up, though, big-name Democrats hit the trail, including President Biden, as the party tries to fire up their voters and make this a choice election and not a referendum on the president.
But first, we could see some new barriers broken next week. Two 25-year-olds, Florida Democrat Maxwell Frost and New Hampshire Republican Carolyn Levitt, could be the first Gen Zers elected to Congress if they win their races. And 5 states could make history by electing black governors for the first time: Georgia, Iowa, Alabama, Maryland, and Arkansas. You're watching a Meet the Press election special.
We're going to be spending the rest of the time making the case that this is not a referendum. It's a choice, a fundamental choice, a choice between two very different visions for the country. And that's what it's about.
Well, midterm elections rarely are choices. It's presidential elections that are choices more often than not. That was President Joe